Hi, my name is Shobit Narang, and today on Balcony Ticket, I have with me one of the finest storytellers, Devashish Makhija. So, Devashish, welcome. So happy to have you on this show. So, a little while ago, I was listening to one of your interviews, and you had spoken about one of your favorite words, that is anthropocentrism, if I'm pronouncing it right. So, let's start by decoding that word first.
The word comes from anthropological, of the human being.
Right.
And centrism really is to place the human being at the center.
Right.
So it's a word that sort of sums up my issue with all of us human beings. We often, any debate around the environment, any debate around man versus animal, any debate around all the decisions and policies that human beings make for human beings, we tend to ignore the fact that we share this planet with a lot of other fellow creatures. So we place ourselves at the center of everything we think about, talk about. So like a hen is seen more like chicken. Yeah. In fact, I don't know if people even refer to hens and roosters as roosters and hens, but they look at one and they call it chicken, because we look at animals as resource, and resource could be food, could be fuel, could be clothing, but we don't really accord anything a consciousness higher than our own when we are talking about ourselves. So that is, it also sort of starts playing into inter-human interactions. Like we'll always then, like the fascist Hindu idea that is currently running this country is of the opinion that, everything was in the Rig Veda and everything was invented by Hindus and the rest of the world stole it from us. What is that but a manifestation of their anthropocentrism? Then it becomes a Hindu centrism, it becomes an Aryan centrism. Everything's about placing ourselves at the center and everybody else at the margins.
Right.
So I'm obsessed by that idea because I think that one idea, it just explains all our selfish, brutal, policies and decisions that we make in our lives.
Right. I've always thought about this. So back in school, we were taught that giraffe is tall. But if you think about it, giraffe is not tall. Giraffe is the size of giraffe. It's only when we are looking at it through the human lens, we think it's tall. So I wanted to ask you, do you think this anthropocentrism, does it come from education, or is it something that is natural to us? Is it instinctive?
It's a mix of the two. Where does a lot of our ideas that we grow up with are, I blame a lot of this on the education system for sure, because the education system that we follow today, you opened up a can of worms actually with that question. So I'll answer it in two parts because you actually asked me two questions.
Right.
So there's one thing that is intrinsic to us as human beings, and I've used this word also often. I will not censor myself since the YouTube is not under the censor board yet. But I believe all human beings are mother chodes. So if that nature of being a barbaric mother chode and not thinking about anything else but what we have set out to achieve is now coded in us genetically. It's just too many thousands of years of our DNA sort of, I think, sort of finding ways to make us believe those things, but just by dint of being born human beings. We don't have to be conditioned or brainwashed. We're just born with a certain coding. Everything else is just sort of calibrating that to make us fine-tuned creatures of destruction. Right. The education system, the one that we follow today, I don't know how many people think about this enough, but it's actually an invention of Germans. Okay. And the Germans, post their fascist history, have actually proceeded to depart from the education system that we still follow. But we still follow that education system. So if you think about the way we are made to stand in line, the way we are made to sing the national anthem or pray every morning before we go to our classrooms, the way we are docked marks for talking out of turn, the way we are being made to be competitive and, there's a first, second, third student in class. All of that is training for the military. The way we are made to march, the way we are made to polish our shoes. Our tie needs to be a certain way. Our shirt shouldn't be out of our, hanging out of our pants, so we get dock marks again. All of that is military training. All of that was invented by the Germans because they wanted all their youngsters to eventually join the military. Yeah. So we are still training our kids in this country to grow up to join the military. And that needs to be questioned, because I don't think we are that world anymore. If there was a looming threat of World War III, yes, everyone should be training their kids to go into the military, but we don't live in that universe today. So that conditioning, I realized that the 18 years that I spent in school, it made me think a certain way. I was taught to not question orders. To be subservient was rewarded. And it took me about roughly another 18 years to question that, beat it out of my system and become the person I am today. So are we all going to then spend 35 years to really find our voices? So the education system is something that is playing a very big and dangerous part in that. And it really serves the people who run this country to not change that too much, just to keep changing the syllabus and say things like, okay, why are we teaching only good things about Nehru? Let's now teach good things about those who started the RSS. But that's not the only thing that needs to be questioned here. Maybe that needs to be questioned too, what the current regime is doing with the syllabus. But what really needs to be questioned is how we are trained to not question. Even when I used to come home from school, and I had very broad-minded parents, so somewhere I got a little insulated from the kind of brainwashing school puts you through. But when you come back from school, you come into most of the people I went to school with, and I see a lot of kids today as well. You come back to households where you have parents who don't want you to question them either. So you just grow up feeling that it's not right to question. Does that not serve people who rule us with an iron fist? That we grow up as individuals who don't know how to question, which sort of, I think, dovetails into the kind of cinema I make, because I try to just keep raising questions, because it took me many years to realize that I wasn't allowed to question enough.
Right. So would that be fair to say that your work is an expression of dissent?
I don't know. How do you define dissent? Because words like dissent under this current climate across the world, in fact, in a lot of countries, not just India, has started being painted as a bad thing. Anyone who says hashtag dissent is also thrown hashtag urban naxal, hashtag Maoist, hashtag anti-national, hashtag not a patriot. So I don't know if my films are dissent, but yes, I will vociferously say that my films raise questions. And I have a lot of questions. I don't want to pick up a stick or a stone or a gun and ask my questions. The only tool then, therefore, I have at my service is my stories. So I use my stories to throw my questions out there.
Right. Spider-Man popularized a proverb which was, with great power comes great responsibility. So I would like to see filmmaking as power. And so what do you think? Do you think filmmaking can make a difference? Because a few days ago, I was listening to one of the interviews by Nandita Das, and she said that initially she was very hopeful and certain that films can make a difference. But now she has become skeptical over time after navigating through this space.
No, when you say great power, again, when you're asking questions, I will first try and question the words you're using. So if you say great power, maybe that applies to a film that stars a Salman Khan, because it is watched by 500 million people. It makes 300 to maybe 800 crores at the box office. My films are not watched. They're watched by a very, very small niche audience.
Right.
Most of the people in that audience seek out my film. Also, my films have to be seeked out, because unlike the films that star Salman Khan, if you have to make a comparison, I'm placing myself at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, I'm placing a Salman Khan film, because those are the most widely watched films almost every year now. Those films have a way of reaching you because of how widely and aggressively marketed they are. But my films don't reach you. You have to reach my film. So the people who actually take the trouble to reach my films already agree with most of the things I have to say. So am I then in a place where I'm being able to shape people's opinions? No, because your opinions are already shaped when you found my films.
Right.
So I know, yes, like I said, my only tool, my only weapon is my storytelling, but I cannot even use it powerfully enough, because I can't use it at a scale where I can reach out to people to have dialogue.
Right.
I can only at best reach out to people who already agree with me. So then am I in a position where I'm wielding power? No. So then therefore, do I have to be very responsible? I don't know. Can I get away with a little irresponsibility? Can I be a little darker than usual? Can I be a little more violent in my films than usual? Maybe, because I am not wielding power.
I would want to extend that question of responsibility. So I had read that the child actor in the film Schindler's List, Olivia, she had spoken about PTSD. So when you're working with child and you have children and you have worked with a child actor in Aji, so what is that like? Is that more responsibility, and how do you navigate through that?
It especially Ajji, because I've had child actors in all my films. In my first film, Moonga, the central protagonist was a 10-year-old kid. In Bhonsle as well, there is a 10-year-old boy who's subject to some violent scenes. But Ajji was a whole different challenge, because there I was navigating not just violence that I might have in the other two films, but sexual violence. That too, with on a gender that I am not. I wasn't born a girl. I don't know what it's like to be a girl.
Right.
I'll never know what it's like for a girl to grow into a woman with the scars of being molested as a girl. Right. So in Ajji specifically, I did fill my team with a few very strong women. Primarily Ajji herself, Sushma Deshpande. She was not just an actor who came and played Ajji. So she was instrumental in speaking to the little girl's parents, counseling them, preparing them for what this little girl will be going through. And when I workshopped the film for about 10 days, the little girl was almost like the Sushma Deshpande's own granddaughter. So she took the responsibility of sort of not being brutally, like with me, I'm the kind of director who will just be full frontal disclosure that this is what the film's about. Now I'm going to push you in these spaces. Let's find the steel within to proceed into those dark spaces together. I do that with all my actors.
Right.
But with a 10-year-old girl, I can't do that because she has not hit puberty yet, and she probably won't even know what I'm talking about. Right. So I left that to Sushma and my associate director, a woman called Pooja Chauhan, to tread that path. So it was a mix of taking the parents into confidence, asking the parents what are they comfortable with us divulging to the little girl. How much do we tell her? How much aware do we make her? And how much is supposed to be played out in a way where we are being metaphorical, being symbolical, but we are not really spelling it out. And then the onus is then on the parents to show the film to the little girl, Sharwani, when she's ready, and to have that difficult conversation. So it was a very careful, calibrated mix with all these entities in on it. Right. So we were very, very careful because that was something that I couldn't have navigated on my own. PTSD or not, I am not equipped to walk down that path.
Right. There's one scene which is the Mannequin rape scene. So I want us to talk a little bit about that because I'm sure you were wary of voyeurism. You must have been wary of too many other things. So how did you shoot that?
So the voyeurism that you speak of, that the camera as the voyeur really is not something that you can entirely escape. Now again, I will have to speak about the nuance within the word voyeurism.
Right.
Because that word can be used very loosely. The very thing that I think I saved the scene from is the very thing that some people who don't agree with the scene accuse me of, voyeurism. Okay. So the camera, by dint of being the audience's eye when you're watching something, anything, is a voyeuristic eye. Because the camera can get into spaces, especially a slightly free-flowing smaller camera can get into spaces that a human eye cannot. And the individual was sitting in a theater or in the confines, in the anonymous confines of his or her home, watching that scene on a screen, and that person not being identified as a person watching that scene. Because if you're watching Ajji, the people in the universe of Ajji, I know it's a fictional universe, but they will never know that you're watching them. So by default, it becomes voyeurism, right? Because the onus of identifying yourself is not on you.
Yeah.
But that voyeurism is the voyeurism of cinema. So to put that aside, the voyeurism that we should address here is the male gaze as voyeur. So that camera can very easily be objectifying the mannequin. And what I was trying to do was to look at the mannequin in such a balanced, safe manner that you feel the horror of what is being done to the mannequin, but you don't, no matter how much you try, you don't get titillated by it. I don't know if I succeeded. Maybe there is still that one man out there in the world who gets turned on by this really ugly act of violence. But the idea was to shoot it very, very carefully, to not linger on body parts the way, scenes, the directors of scenes in such films in the 80s in Hindi cinema. Even though there are some films, like, for example, there's a film called 20 Saal Baad, and it's a rape revenge film. It's a supposedly feminist film with a female, perspective, but when there is a rape scene, somehow the camera objectifies the female body. It doesn't. Those directors didn't know how to make that horrific act feel horrific, even to a male viewer. So the objective here for me, the DOP, and more importantly for my edit, where do you place the cut? Because sometimes that free-flowing camera can sort of catch a certain body part that for a fleeting second could be titillating for a slightly deranged viewer. So it was where we placed that cut. It was a really difficult scene to cut. So at every stage, from the time we rehearsed it with the actors to how we set that up, what the mise-en-scene was, to how we shot it, to how I cut it, we tried to be very, very careful at every stage that the only thing that needs to be communicated is the horror of what this mannequin, and therefore a woman in place of the mannequin, would go through. And how do we save it from being the male gaze as voyeur? Not just voyeurism, because voyeurism, and a lot of people did accuse me of voyeurism. And I'm like, I can't not be voyeuristic. But I tried to let it not be the male gaze.
Right.
Voyeur.
Right. Just a follow-up question on that. Why was it very important to show that scene? Because a lot of times in the past, because of all the censor and regulation issues, subtext were used to show a scene like that. So why did you not rely on subtext, and why did you have to brutally show that scene?
So I said something just now, and that was, I'll reiterate those words. The words that I'm now going to reiterate was really my guiding light for this film. I needed to transfer the horror of what a woman goes through to the viewer.
Yeah.
So what you say is not wrong. You can keep the violence off screen, or you can insinuate it, or you can use symbolism, you can use metaphor, you can use a fable to supplement that narrative, to communicate to the audience what happened, what the protagonist who has been raped is going through. But I didn't merely want to communicate. I wanted the audience to feel that horror. Right. And to make them feel that horror, I could not turn the camera away. The camera needed to be on the horror. And for the camera to be on the horror, then I had to find a new way to keep the camera on the horror and not allow it to be titillating voyeuristic. Therefore, in fact, that whole, the idea of using the cell phone camera. The cell phone camera, by default, becomes a comment on all of us as consumers of such imagery, because we are also consuming such imagery anonymously on our devices. Porn is consumed in that manner today. That anonymity of the person consuming it is a big part of that voyeurism. So me making you conscious of that device, and there being a character there who is shooting it through that device, makes it two levels of voyeurism, two levels of the comment on that voyeurism. So I needed all of those layers of that horror to transfer to the audience, to also point a finger at the audience that you may be sitting right now watching this film and feel like you're not complicit in this rape, but somewhere, sometime in your life, you've done this too. So you are complicit in the larger cycle of this violence. So I didn't want to exempt the viewer. And for me, this scene therefore became that scene where I incriminate every viewer.
We'll talk about your short films in a little while. But before that, in both your films, Aji and Bhonsle, there was a dog which was a part of the act, which was a character in itself. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Anthropocentrism, man. I have to populate the frame if I can help it now. I'm even in my future films. So if you see Bhonsle, for example, if you take the dog and the cat and the crow and the spider and the cockroaches out of it, the film still works.
Yeah.
It still meets its broader political, anthropological statements.
Right.
But for me, it's important to sneak in that anthropocentric statement, that we might be concerning ourselves with the migrant versus the insider, In Ajji's case, the woman versus the man, the Muslim versus the Hindu. But all of these are human concerns.
Right.
And when those human beings who you're rooting for place themselves at the center of their prerogatives, they are still sidelining the dog and the cat and the crow and the cockroach. And where is their representation? Who is talking about them? So in Ajji as well, when she decides to take revenge on behalf of her granddaughter, she needs to start feeling cold-blooded, right? So to feel cold-blooded, what does she do? She goes and kills chicken. See, I'm calling a hen chicken. She goes and kills a hen. Now she kills that hen, and we don't grudge her that murder. That is murder. But by then we are rooting for her to bring down who we've seen as the bad guy. So as a filmmaker, also I am being anthropocentric. I am being selfish. I am placing my prerogatives over the prerogatives of a hen. I had to murder 3 hens to get that shot right. There were 3 retakes. Because I needed it in a single shot. I didn't want to cheat. So I am as much a mother chode as Ajji was, as Dhawle was, all of us are. So I need those, somewhere I need those comments to be there as well to raise those questions. That you might be feeling something at layer 1, but layer 2 in the story will question what you felt at layer 1. Hopefully layer 3 will question layer 2. So that I make everybody think about the fact that we need to ultimately not just question left versus right and Hindu versus Muslim and man versus woman. We need to question our place in the scheme of things. Exactly. It all starts there.
Very well. So, yeah. You started your work with short film making, and when you had started, there was a wave of short films in a way. At some point, you made a lot of short films, and there was this wave of short films. So, do you think that wave is ongoing? And do you think there's a place for a short filmmaker? Because a lot of people think that short filmmaker is not really a filmmaker in the general equation.
So I'll take a step back and I'll first bust that misconception. I started as a feature filmmaker. I was directing a Yashraj film for 3.5 years in 2006, 7, 8 and early 2009.
Wow. Okay.
It was a Yashraj Disney tie-up. It was a tie-up for 2 feature films, animation films. And mine was the biggest budget Yashraj film till that time, till 2009. And I was in production for 3.5 years, but the first film in that tie-up, a film called Roadside Romeo, it lost a lot of money, it tanked very badly, and Disney broke that tie-up. And my film got shelved after 3.5 years of work. And I had a 3-film deal with Yashraj. So we wouldn't be having this conversation if that film got completed, because I would be a Yashraj filmmaker. I would have had a very different trajectory. So that film got shelved. I walked away from a 3-film deal because I got... मुझे धक्का लग गया कि यार how can you take away 3.5 years of my life like this?
Right.
And I then started questioning what I was doing with Yashraj in the first place. Why was I trying to make those stories? Because I had different stories to tell. So I went on a different journey then, and I had 16 shelved films over those 6-7 years. Films that I was trying to set up, one that was shot 90% and never got completed, still lying in the cans. Many films that went into pre-production and then someone pulled the plug on it. In desperation, I made short films because my features were not being made. So I made short films 10 years after I started my feature film journey. So did I believe that there was a zeitgeist of short films? No. Did I care? No. Because zeitgeists are not something that can help you decide what you should be doing with your life.
Right.
Because you can do something that can start a zeitgeist. So I was just desperate. Terribly Tiny Talkies asked me if I'll make something for 50,000 rupees. And to make a short film for 50,000 rupees even in 2015 was a pretty rough task. So I was desperate. I sat down and wrote something in 24 hours and I made Elaichi. And then 6 months later, they wanted to make another round of films, so I made Ugly Bar. Then Manoj and I were trying to make Bhonsle for almost a year until then. And it started and stopped 2 times. So he said, why are you not making a short film with me? I said, I didn't know you wanted to do one. So I wrote Tandav. And then Tandav just changed the game for me and Ajji happened.
Yeah.
So all of these things were accidental. I didn't plan them. I was not trying to ride a wave. Was there a wave then? In fact, in my interviews back then, I was asked this question a lot. And I kept warning people against seeing the online space as this messiah that will save us. Because everybody then was trying to make money and everyone kept asking me, so do your films make money? I said, no, Elaichi, I was given 50,000 rupees to make it. I spent another 50,000 from my pocket. Did I ever see that money back? No. I spent another 2 lakhs sending it around to festivals. So short films are only a drain on your pocket. There is no monetary model. They never will be. So why do we make them? For the artistic freedom, man. Why would you give that up? So was there a wave? Do I believe there's a wave now? I don't know. I don't give a fuck. I am only looking for artistic freedom, and where I get that, I really cherish it. So I will milk that medium as much as I can, as long as it's giving me freedom. So by 2017-18, the online short film space stopped giving freedom because there was so much shit out there that nobody knew how to get to the good films. So I also gave up on it, and I moved to doing a GN Bhonsle.
It's been a long journey. So, Devashish, how were you able to navigate through it? Was it disheartening?
It still is disheartening, man. People would think that after Bhonsle released and sort of got a pretty effusive response online, you would think that it's very easy for me to set up a film. I'm back to zero. Getting producers to put money in my film is as difficult. I still don't have any producers attached to any of my future films. I'm hustling. There are a couple of people who want to see my films get made. They are hustling on my behalf. It's really hard. The disheartening bit is not something that is a phase and then goes away. It's there forever when you decide to do what you want to do and not what the world wants you to do.
Right.
So nothing's changed, nothing will change.
But how are you able to stay true to your voice despite all of this?
I don't know, man. It's a fairly, I see such decision making as binary, at every stage. Like if you start, I know I'll sound really metaphysical and almost like a spiritual guru, but I don't mean to. I just have learned to simplify my decision making. Otherwise, it's really hard to make it. When you look at what should I do with my life? Should I make work for hire that will make me money, or should I stand my artistic ground? And if I make a big philosophical stand for my life, I might come off as, fuck, how did he make that big decision? But I made no such big decision. I just made every decision for today. I woke up today and I said, do I want to go down this path today or that path? I said this path. It's a yes or a no. It's a black or a white. It's a green or a red. It's really that simple. Tomorrow I'll wake up and ask myself this question again. And this much I can say with surety that every morning this question is very hard to answer.
Right.
I still have a hard time answering it because to date I don't know where next month rent is going to come from. I still don't live a very comfortable life. Now also when I go for meetings with my assistant directors in a cafe where I will not, in small cafes, I can't even meet them in a Starbucks because I can't afford coffee at a Starbucks. So when I land up there walking or on a cycle, my AD team, who's probably a new assistant director who never met me before, he asked the others that, so Devashish doesn't even have a scooter. We thought he has a car. I said, but look at the films I make. I don't even get paid enough to pay rent. How am I going to afford a scooter? So I have taught myself to walk. So if there's any meeting within minimum 4 kilometers radius of where I stay, I walk. Because every 100 rupees I'll save on my auto rickshaw, I can put into a short film that I'll make. So these decisions every morning are not easy to make, man. But I just sort of break them down into many small questions that I ask myself every day. Because I don't know if I can make those big philosophical decisions. I don't know if anyone can and stay true to them. I don't know.
Right. You have worked on a comic book for children, and I think that's why this question might be relevant for you. So last week I spent a lot of time with my cousins and little cousins, and while we were just switching through OTT, I just figured that we have not created enough content for children. And since we are trying to be more aware and more socio-politically aware, I think it's the right time to be more developmental and aware, especially with our content for children. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Now, when you say content, I'm assuming you mean the audiovisual medium.
Right. Audiovisual.
Film, right? Do you know if there are any producers out there who will give a filmmaker money to make a film for children? No. Even the Children's Film Society of India has been destroyed by the government.
Yeah.
So there is no state support for children's films in India. Nandita Das could actually tell you a lot more about it because she headed the Children's Film Society for a while.
Yeah.
So there is no support. Nobody knows how to recover money. It all boils down to that, man. Where do you pitch these films? Where do you sell these films? Who will watch these films? How will you market these films? Which film festivals will program these films? It boils down to that. And when you ask these difficult questions, nobody has any answers for a children's film. So nobody makes children's films. I really don't know what else to say to that. I had ideas to make children's films. Nobody wanted to back them.
Right.
I just never made them. So I put those stories into children's books.
Right.
In fact, I did two. They were not comics. They were picture books.
Right.
Two children's picture books, which are still actually bestsellers. And to date, they released in 2011. And to date, 1 month's rent every year comes from the sale of those books. They still serve me, those books. And this month in December, we are already in December, my young adult fiction novel is out. So I have written a novel around the developmental, environmental, political scenario with a 10-year-old child as the protagonist for young adults, because I know nobody will give me money to make my films. So I'm still writing for children, but I don't know how to make films for them because nobody will give me money.
I also want to talk a little bit about that first graphic novel of yours, When Ali Became Bajrang Bali, because it's been one of the best sellers and it was also part of the CBSE curriculum. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Again, it's not a graphic novel, it's a children's picture book. And my animation film that I told you about, the Yashraj Disney animation film. So I was in that space, imagining animals and, imagining a riot of colors and trying to put whatever politics I had back then. In fact, that film was a political film for children. And I was, in fact, planning to make 3 animation films over my life. And one animation film, unlike a live action film, takes minimum 5 to 7 years of your life because it's a lot of work. We're creating everything, virtually.
Yeah.
So what you're asking me is a path I had chosen for myself back then, but it didn't materialize. And after that, the animation industry only died in India. So I was living with all those characters and all of those things back then. And because those films didn't get made, I I got a chance to put a lot of that material into children's books, and I jumped at that chance. So a lot of the remnants from my animation film sort of found their way into this picture book. And luckily for me, it worked, and I got closure on my animation film. Otherwise, I'd be carrying all of that inside me, and I wouldn't know where to put it. So it has its seeds in that shelved animation film.
In closing, I would like to ask you something. So we are expecting a regulation very soon. So how are you dealing with that? Does that scare you?
Even without a filmmaker like me, especially, even without regulation, my platforms that put my films out, the festivals that choose to show or choose to not show my films, like when Ajji released in the theaters, nobody went to watch it, but nobody knows that 4.5 minutes were cut out of the film. 2.5 minutes were taken out of the Mannequin scene. My producers themselves are often a little skeptical of should we allow Dev to take things to such an extreme? How will we sell this film eventually? So I'm subject to that anyways. So regulation or not, I don't think my life will change too much. Yes, disheartened about is that we will now have to be fighting many more battles than we were fighting already. But what I find heartening, and this is something I tell everybody who is suddenly waking up to the threat of regulation at many levels and not being able to explicitly put out the ideas they want to put out. What is heartening is Iran of the 1980s. Yeah. So when you look at the Iranian filmmakers in the 70s and the 80s and the voice that they found thereafter in the 80s and the 90s was because of the fascist regulatory regime that they had to navigate.
Right.
You wouldn't know, but a lot of the films that got banned in Iran, that spoke up against the Iran regime, that we celebrate as an international audience but never even released in Iran, were all funded by the state of Iran. There was almost no private funding at that time. So those filmmakers found a way to not only circumnavigate the rules, but they circumnavigated to the rules of financing and even raised finance from that government and made those films and then got fucked by them. Can you imagine at what level they were operating? What level of creativity, at what level of originality? Yeah. So they were pushed to find a voice that no other country in the world had until that time. And to date, people keep talking about Iranian cinema of the 80s and 90s as cinema that you had never seen before. Now tell me about any period in Indian cinema that has managed to achieve that. There is none. We don't have a movement in Indian cinema that put India on the map. So I'm wondering, if the regime makes it so difficult for us to make cinema, will we become the Iran of the 70s and the 80s? Maybe we will be pushed so hard that we find a voice that makes us the most original talent to look out for. So I find that probably something to look forward to. Of course, we will have to bleed really hard before we get there. But I think we should be pushed. No, I think we've also gotten a little lazy. Filmmakers in this country don't push themselves. We get satisfied with good. We don't aspire for great. When was the last time that a bona fide Indian production brought back a Palme d'Or or a Golden Lion or a Golden Leopard? We'll start throwing names like Pothir Panchali, Neecha Nagar, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. What about the 1990s? What about the 2000s? Zero. So maybe this will push us to go there. So I'm hopeful about that, and I'm already in that space. Nobody watches my films. My films barely get a release. I have a hard time raising money for my films. So my life won't change so much. So I'll just stay the course. Nothing's going to change.
I just want to reassure you that there's still an audience that really loves watching your film. And really, thank you so much for always speaking your truth.
I wish that, but I know I also need to be real that it's a niche audience.
Right.
And when I'm being celebrated by a niche audience, yes, that is also empowering me to keep making films. But I can't delude myself into believing that I'm now in a position of power. Like you said, great power. I do not have great power.
Right.
So I like to check on that. But it's a niche audience, and we may not be able to change the world or change the country or affect policy making. But what we can do is that we can really push to be original, because the pressure of power is not there on us.
I just wanted to tell you that, maybe you could be a reference point for someone who wanted to speak their truth and make the film. So I think even that's a big thing.
Absolutely. I cherish that, of course.
Yeah. So once again, thank you so much for having this honest interview. I had a lovely time talking to you.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and never miss an update on film interactions.